Thanksgiving was supposed to feel warm, but the air in my mother's dining room felt tight enough to snap. I was setting the last plate on the table when Raymond stepped behind me. I could feel the heat of his breath before he even spoke. His voice was low and sharp, the same tone he used when he wanted everyone to know who owned the room. "You have money in that fancy hospital job of yours. Tyler needs help. Stop being selfish." I kept my hands steady on the plate even as my stomach drew tight. I told him earlier that I would not cover Tyler's debt again. I said it calmly. I said it politely. In this house, calm was never protection. Raymond moved first. I did not even have time to turn fully. His hand reached toward the credenza, snatched the framed family photo from the surface, and in one smooth, furious motion, he hurled it directly at my face. The sound split the room before the pain did. The frame hit me along the brow bone and shattered. A hot sting cut upward and glass scraped just past my eye. Warm blood trickled down the side of my face before I even understood what had happened. I stumbled backward, hand pressed to my cheek. The metallic smell mixed with roasted turkey and cinnamon as the room spun. I felt the edge of the counter bite into my hip. Raymond did not flinch. His jaw was set and his eyes burned with the self-righteous anger of a man who believed nothing could ever be wrong. Tyler stood near the entryway watching everything. He did not rush forward. He did not look horrified. He lifted his phone and smirked as he recorded me, my blood, my shock. "Look at you," he said in a mocking sing-song voice. "Drama queen." I tasted iron and swallowed hard. I turned toward my mother, who stood near the stove with a glass of white wine in her hand. She was close enough to touch me, close enough to see the blood sliding down my temple. She raised her glass to her lips and took a sip. Not a single word slipped out. Not an ounce of concern crossed her expression. My vision blurred as I backed into the kitchen tiles. My fingers slipped along the counter, leaving streaks of red. Pots simmered behind me, and something in the oven beeped as if nothing in this room was cracking open. Raymond muttered something about respect while adjusting his shirt as though I had inconvenienced him. I pressed a towel to my face, though my hands trembled too hard to hold it firmly. I tried to breathe, but every inhale scraped at the fear rising in my throat. In the middle of the chaos, I heard laughter. Quiet, mean, delighted. It was Tyler, still recording, still grinning. "This is gold," he said under his breath as he moved closer to get a clearer shot. I turned and met his eyes. There was no guilt, only entertainment. He was not recording because he was scared. He was recording because he wanted proof that I was the punchline. My mother's silence filled the room louder than his laughter. She kept her eyes on the table settings like she was choosing which napkin looked best with the turkey. Blood was running down my cheek onto my shirt, and she took another slow drink. My knees wobbled and I grabbed the counter. The room swam with golden light and shadows. I forced myself upright and stepped toward the hall. Raymond growled behind me. "Don't walk out on this family." The threat in his voice was not hidden. It never was. Tyler moved his phone closer. "Say hi to the camera, Emmy," he taunted. My pulse thudded in my ears as I shoved past them both. I could feel glass crunching under my shoe. I moved through the hallway with one hand pressed to my wound and the other gripping the wall for balance. The house felt like it was shrinking around me with every step. When I reached the door, I gasped for air. The cold outside hit me hard as I stumbled toward my car. My hand shook as I grabbed the handle. Blood smeared onto the metal. I slid into the driver's seat and shut the door. Oh. The sound of it closing was the first thing that felt solid. My vision blurred again. I blinked hard, trying to clear the haze. My mother's silence replayed in my head louder than the shattering frame. My breath came in short, uneven bursts, and the pain near my eye grew sharper. I fumbled for my phone with slippery fingers. I did not call my mother. I did not call anyone from that house. I dialed Valerie Green. Her voice answered on the second ring. "Emily, what happened? Are you hurt? Where are you?" Her tone cracked the numbness around my chest. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. I could only breathe. Shallow, panicked, hurt. "Valerie," I whispered finally. He threw it at me. "I am bleeding. Please. I need help." As I waited for her car to arrive, I pressed the towel tighter against my wound and felt the sting radiate through my skull. The house behind me glowed with warm holiday lights. Inside that warm glow, my mother still had not said a single word. Pain was sharp, but my mother's silence cut deeper. When I think back to the beginning, it never starts with shouting or broken things. It starts with a warm kitchen and the scent of vanilla candles my father used to light every evening. I remember his laugh filling the hallway and the way he would tap my nose when he wanted me to smile. Those memories are soft, like worn cotton, and they always end the same way with a door closing forever. I was 9 when he died. People say time dulls loss, but for me, it was not a soft fading. It was a clean tear that split my childhood in two, before and after. In the before, I was seen. In the after, I disappeared. My mother did not collapse the way people expect grieving wives to. She hardened. She moved quickly through the funeral arrangements, through the paperwork, through life, like she was on a timetable that did not allow space for grief. I remember sitting at the table tracing circles on the wood while she stared into nothing. I asked if she wanted me to help with the dishes. She did not answer. A few months later, she met Raymond. He came into our house with a handshake that felt more like a warning. He was polite at first in that practiced way men can be when they want to win a woman but do not care about the child standing next to her. When they married, I was 11. The ceremony was small, held in a courthouse. My mother wore light blue and smiled like she had been waiting for someone to tell her what to do next. Raymond put his hand on my shoulder for the photograph, and his grip tightened just enough to let me know that smile was only for her. From the beginning, the rules in the house changed. In the before, I was allowed to laugh in hallways and talk at dinner. In the after, there was a new rhythm, a new silence. Raymond believed children should be quiet and obedient. He said it often, sometimes as advice, sometimes as a threat. My mother absorbed his beliefs like they were gospel. When I asked why I could not visit my cousins, she said children need structure. When I asked why I could not hang pictures in my room, she said, Raymond likes the house neat. When I asked why she stopped reading me bedtime stories, she said you are old enough to sleep without all that fuss. At 12, I learned the weight of the word fuss. It meant my needs were inconvenient. It meant joy was something that required permission. Then came Tyler. He was 10 when they moved into our house, his arms full of video games and sports gear. He smelled like bubblegum and mischief. The first thing he said to me was, "I get the bigger room." My mother did not correct him. Over the years, I tried to be patient with him. I thought maybe if I tried hard enough, he would see me as a sister. But Tyler absorbed his father's habits faster than I learned how to avoid them. He could spill juice on the carpet, and my mother would chuckle and hand him a towel. I could breathe the wrong way, and she would tell me I was being dramatic. The shift was never sudden. It was slow erosion. A comment here, a sigh there. 1,000 small moments where I felt myself shrinking. Dinner became the battlefield where I learned to make myself invisible. Raymond would talk about work and expect admiration. Tyler would brag about friends or video games or school fights, and my mother would smile like he was some kind of prize. If I added anything to the conversation, Raymond would wave a hand to silence me. Let the adults talk. I was 13 when he first raised his voice at me. He accused me of losing one of his tools from the garage. I had not been in the garage for months, but it did not matter. He yelled until my ears rang, and my mother stood at the counter stirring a pot like she could not hear any of it. When he finished, she looked at me and said, "Emily, you know how he gets when he is stressed. Apologize so we can move on." I apologized for something I had not done. That was the night I learned that truth had no place in this family. At 14, Tyler began testing his power. He would hide my notebooks or unplug my alarm clock so I would be late for school. When I confronted him, he laughed and said, "Who do you think they will believe?" He was right. My mother always believed him or pretended to. She said boys will be boys and accused me of being too sensitive. That phrase became the soundtrack of those years. Too sensitive when Tyler poured soda over my homework. Too sensitive when Raymond criticized the way I sat at the table. Too sensitive when my mother forgot to pick me up after choir practice. Being too sensitive became my designated flaw, the reason every wrongdoing was somehow my fault. I tried to win her back in small ways. I cleaned the house without being asked. I tried getting straight A's. I cooked dinner when she worked late. Each time I waited for a smile or a thank you. Instead, Raymond would point out a missed spot on the counter and Tyler would complain the food was bland. One winter evening when I was 15, Tyler shoved me against the hallway wall because I was in his way. My mother was 5 feet away adjusting a wreath. I said ouch, and she sighed like I had interrupted something important. "Emily, please," she said. "There is always some drama with you. Go do your homework." I went to my room and cried into my pillow, trying to muffle the sound so no one would scold me for that, too. By 16, I knew which floorboards creaked and which questions not to ask. I learned to hold tension in my shoulders and silence on my tongue. My father used to tell me to speak up, but after he died, speaking up only made things worse. I became the quiet girl, the responsible girl, the girl who blended into the background. It was not a personality. It was survival. When I turned 17, my school held an award ceremony. I had worked harder than ever studying late into the night to make the honor roll. I invited my mother weeks in advance. I left the flyer on the fridge. That night I scanned the crowd from the stage. I saw parents clapping grandparents, wiping tears, people smiling so wide their cheeks flushed. In the back row near the exit, I saw an empty chair where she was supposed to be. She texted me afterward. "Sorry, honey, Tyler had a rough day. We will celebrate later." Later never came. I walked home in the cold, thinking, maybe if I became perfect enough one day, she would choose me. I was wrong. What I did not know then was that this childhood, the silence, the favoritism, the bruises you could not see, was not the worst of it. It was only the foundation, the seeds of hurt that would bloom into the night Raymond hurled that framed photo at my face, and Tyler lifted his phone to record me bleeding. Those seeds had been planted long before the first drop of blood ever touched my skin. By the time I entered my teenage years, the house already felt like a place I moved through rather than lived in. Every room carried a memory of something spoken too sharply or something ignored too easily. I learned early that I could not rely on anyone inside those walls, so I tried to carve out small corners of safety on my own. My bedroom became the only space where I could breathe without feeling judged. I kept the lights dim and lined the shelves with books I borrowed from the school library. Reading was the only time I felt seen because books did not interrupt. Books did not sigh. Books did not call me too sensitive. At 15, everything shifted again. Tyler had grown taller and louder and learned how to use his smirk like a weapon. He realized that our mother listened to him more than anyone else, and once he understood the power of that imbalance, he never stopped exploiting it. He would steal my markers, break the zipper on my backpack, shove me when no one was looking. When I pushed him away, he would shout for my mother and claim I hit him. She always chose his version of events. She said boys were more physical by nature, that he probably did not mean anything by it, that I needed to be patient. Patience felt like another word for silence. I tried to tell her once that Tyler scared me. She was standing at the bathroom mirror applying mascara. She paused, met my eyes in the reflection, and said, "Emily, you get worked up over everything. He is your brother. He loves you." It was astonishing how easily she lied to herself, how quickly she dismissed emotions that did not fit the story she preferred to believe. Raymond grew more hostile too. He demanded obedience the way some people demand service. If he asked for something, I had to stop everything to respond. If I hesitated, he called me ungrateful. If I looked upset, he accused me of disrespect. He used phrases like "under my roof" and "as long as you live here." Those words clung to my skin like damp fabric. Dinner was the worst part of the day. We ate together because Raymond insisted on family structure, but family to him meant he spoke and everyone listened. If I picked up a fork incorrectly, he criticized my manners. If I answered too softly, he mocked my voice. If I answered too firmly, he narrowed his eyes. Tyler always watched me during meals like he was waiting for me to slip so he could laugh. Every evening felt like a test I could not pass. One night at 15, Tyler flicked mashed potatoes onto my sleeve and whispered "Ghost Girl" under his breath. I jerked my arm away, and he laughed loud enough for Raymond to notice. Raymond turned to me and demanded I apologize for disrupting the table. I sat there swallowing anger so hot it burned my throat. My mother kept her gaze on the green beans she was scooping onto her plate. She never once asked what happened. That was when I realized silence was a choice she made, not something she fell into. The older I got, the heavier that silence became. At 16, I joined the after-school yearbook club just to stay away from home longer. I volunteered for every layout assignment, every late-night editing session, anything that kept me out of the house when Raymond came home. My mother accused me of avoiding responsibilities. Raymond accused me of showing off. Tyler accused me of thinking I was better than everyone else. None of them asked why I stayed late. None of them asked if I was happy. They were satisfied with the version of me that caused them the least inconvenience. When the school held parent-teacher conferences that year, my mother did not show up. My English teacher sat across from an empty chair and said I seemed tired lately. I did not know how to explain that being tired was the only state I understood. At 17, I found a spark of hope in something small but meaningful. My art teacher entered one of my photography pieces into a state competition. When I made the finals, I walked home with the certificate clutched in my hand like proof that I existed somewhere beyond the walls of my house. I left it on the kitchen counter hoping my mother would notice. She put a stack of mail on top of it without reading it. A week later, Tyler spilled juice on it and tossed it in the trash. When I reached into the bin to retrieve it, Raymond scolded me for making a mess. That moment stayed with me for years. It was not the ruined certificate that hurt most. It was realizing that no one in that house cared enough to ask why it mattered to me. The day of the state showcase, I dressed in my best shirt and waited by the window for my mother to get off work early the way she had promised. I watched car after car pass the driveway. When my phone finally buzzed, it was a text. "Sorry, honey, cannot make it. Tyler is not feeling well. Get photos for me." I went alone. While other parents took pictures and hugged their kids, I stood by my photograph pretending not to mind the empty space beside me. My art teacher offered to take a picture with me and I smiled for the camera, but inside I felt something break. Not loudly, quietly, a fracture too small to notice at first. By 18, I had learned how to disappear inside my own life. I kept my voice soft and my footsteps quiet. I avoided confrontation. I minimized my needs. I perfected the art of becoming unremarkable. My friends at school thought I was shy. They did not know that speaking freely never felt like an option. Every conversation in my house felt like a negotiation with invisible terms. Every breath felt measured. When I think back on those years, the strangest part is not the pain. It is how normal it all felt, how routine, how predictable. The cruelty was not loud. It was steady. A drip, a whisper, a sigh, a shrug, a dismissive glance. By the time I entered adulthood, I was already conditioned to expect nothing from the people who were supposed to protect me. That expectation would shape everything that came later. It would shape the way I reacted when Raymond hurled a framed photo at my face. It would shape the numbness I felt when Tyler lifted his phone to record me bleeding. It would shape the devastation in my chest when my mother stood a few feet away and said nothing at all. The truth is, the attack on Thanksgiving did not begin that night. It began in these years when I learned that my pain was an inconvenience, and my voice was an annoyance, and my existence was optional in the eyes of the people who should have treasured me. Those teenage scars were not visible, but they carved the path that brought me to the moment when blood ran down my cheek and my mother lifted her wine glass like nothing was happening. By the time I reached the end of high school, there was a tension living inside me that never seemed to loosen. It sat between my ribs like a knot that tightened every time I walked through the front door. I had survived childhood by being quiet. I had survived my teenage years by being invisible. But something inside me was beginning to crack in ways I could not ignore anymore. The breaking point did not arrive in a dramatic explosion. It grew slowly from dozens of moments that chipped away at whatever hope I still had for this family. One of those moments happened the summer before I turned 18. I earned a partial scholarship to a local medical training program, something I had worked for since 9th grade. I memorized anatomy charts in secret after Raymond went to bed, practiced calculations during lunch breaks, and spent weekends volunteering at the local community clinic. My guidance counselor told me she had never seen someone fight so hard for a future without any parental support. When the acceptance letter came, I carried it into the living room like it was something fragile and glowing. I half expected my mother to smile, maybe hug me, maybe ask how proud she should be, but she barely glanced up from her magazine. "That is nice," she murmured. Raymond tightened the laces on his boots and said nothing. Tyler snorted from the couch and said, "Guess the school was desperate." I held the letter in my hands as though it were heavy enough to anchor me to the ground. I asked my mother if she could attend the scholarship luncheon the following week. She waved a hand as though brushing off a fly. "I will see if I can." Those words were always code for no. I still went, hoping maybe she would surprise me. I sat among families taking pictures, parents wiping tears, siblings clutching bouquets. I smiled politely, but inside I felt like an extra in someone else's celebration. When the event ended, I walked home alone, staring at the pavement so no one would see how tightly my jaw was clenched. Later that night, my mother did not ask me how it went. She did not ask what the scholarship was for or what it meant to me. Instead, she complained that I had not taken the trash out. Tyler laughed as he tossed an empty bag at me. The next week, another crack formed. I got a part-time job as a receptionist at a dental clinic to start saving money for school supplies. Raymond found out, and instead of congratulating me, he said, "Your car insurance is due next month. You can cover it now." It was not a request. It was a command. My paycheck barely covered the bills he kept shifting onto me. Gas, groceries, phone. He called it responsibility. I called it extraction. But the sharpest blow came after I received my first scholarship fund deposit. It was not a large amount, but it was mine. Money I earned. Money that represented my way out. 2 days later, Tyler crashed his bike into a mailbox trying to impress friends. He broke the chain, tore the seat, dented the frame. Raymond knocked on my bedroom door that evening with the tone he used when he pretended to be calm. "You need to transfer some of your scholarship money," he said. "Tyler needs a new bike." I stared at him in disbelief. My voice came out small but steady. "That money is for school." Raymond leaned against my doorframe like he owned the air in my room. "This is a family. We take care of each other. Your mother and I have done everything for you." The guilt was a thick rope he had wrapped around my neck for years. This time it burned more than it tightened. I said no. For the first time in my life, I said no to him. His expression shifted into something cold and sharp. He stepped into my room, grabbed the acceptance letter off my desk, and crumpled it in his fist. When I reached to take it back, he slapped my hand away. "You think you are better than us because of this stupid program," he said. "You should be grateful we let you stay in this house." I felt something tremble inside me. It was not fear. It was exhaustion. A bone-deep fatigue from fighting for scraps of validation. My mother walked by the doorway as Raymond shouted. She paused only long enough to say, "Emily, do not start. You know how he gets. Apologize." I looked at her, and for the first time I saw her clearly. Saw the way she hid behind his anger. Saw the way she used his moods as excuses to avoid accountability. Saw the way she chose comfort over courage every single time. I did not apologize. Raymond stormed out. Tyler smirked at me from the hallway. The next morning, another blow landed without warning. My mother told me they had decided I needed to contribute more to the household now that I had a scholarship. I asked what that meant. She handed me a list of expenses equal to half my paycheck. When I protested, she said, "Money comes and goes, your family is forever." I almost laughed. Forever felt like a cage. The real breaking point came a week later. I arrived home from work to find the door to my bedroom cracked open. Tyler had gone through my drawers. My laptop was on the bed with the screen smudged from fingerprints. My scholarship documents were scattered on the floor. My bank statement was open. When I asked what he was doing, he shrugged and said, "Seeing how much money you are hiding." My mother scolded me for yelling at him. Raymond shouted that if I did not like the rules, I could leave. For a moment, I thought he meant it. For a moment, I let myself imagine walking out into the night and never coming back. But I was 18 and terrified and broke and uncertain. I stayed, not because I wanted to, because I felt trapped. The final crack came quietly. It was a Sunday morning. Sunlight spilled across the table. I made coffee. My mother walked in, looked at me with a kind of tired annoyance, and said, "Sometimes I think things would have been easier if you were not so difficult." I stood there holding my mug as the last thread inside me snapped. I realized nothing I did would ever be enough. Not the grades, not the chores, not the silence. Nothing. That was the moment I stopped trying. I applied for a work-study dorm at the medical program. I packed little by little. I saved what I could. And 3 weeks after graduation, I walked out of that house with 2 bags and the courage of someone who had nothing left to lose. My mother barely hugged me. Raymond did not look up from the television. Tyler said, "Do not come crawling back." I walked down the driveway without turning around. The sun was bright. The air was warm. And though my heart felt bruised, I knew this was the first step away from a life where I had spent nearly a decade being unseen. What I did not know was that leaving did not end the hurt. It only paused it. The real storm would come years later on another warm day, on another Thanksgiving, when a framed photo would fly toward my face and all the fractures of my past would finally split open. When I finally left home at 18, I thought freedom would feel like a door swinging open into a brighter world. I thought the air outside that house would fill my lungs in a different way, lighter and cleaner, free from the heaviness that had lived in my chest for so long. And for a little while, it did. Those first weeks on campus felt unreal, like I had stepped into someone else's life. I had a small dorm room with a narrow bed and a wobbly desk, but it was mine. No one barged in without knocking. No one rifled through my drawers. No one shouted from the living room demanding chores or money or silence. For the first time, I could leave a coffee mug on the counter without fear of being scolded. It felt strange how something so simple could feel so liberating. My roommate Hannah was the kind of person who laughed easily, who decorated her side of the room with string lights and photos of friends. She did not tiptoe the way I did. She did not apologize before speaking the way I did. She lived like the world would not punish her for wanting things. I admired that. I envied it. During that first year, I committed myself to my classes, burying myself in textbooks and clinical labs. Being busy felt safe. Every hour spent learning radiology techniques or practicing patient intake charts was an hour I did not have to think about the house I had left behind. My professors praised my focus, complimented my precision, told me I had the makings of an excellent technician. They did not know that discipline was not a virtue I had earned, but a survival skill I had been forced to master. Despite the new environment, the past clung to me like smoke. I still jumped at sudden noises. I still apologized too quickly. I still held my breath when someone raised their voice, even when it had nothing to do with me. Trauma has a way of shaping you even when you believe you have left it behind. During my second year, I got a job as an X-ray assistant at a small imaging center downtown. The work was demanding, but I loved it. There was something grounding about holding stillness for someone else, about offering calm in moments when patients felt fear. Maybe I was drawn to the field because I understood what it was like to hide pain behind a steady face. The women I worked with were kind, but they often asked why I never talked about family. I shrugged it off and said I had grown up fast. They usually nodded knowingly, assuming that meant something simpler and less painful than the truth. My mother called occasionally, always with the same pattern. First came the warm greeting, then the soft sigh, then the inevitable request. Money, help, advice for Tyler, sympathy for Raymond. Every call followed the same script. Tyler crashed the car. "You have savings now, right?" "Raymond is stressed. Can you help with groceries?" "We need support. You are the oldest." On campus, bills stacked up quickly and every shift at the imaging center mattered. But guilt was a language my family had taught me fluently. So I sent money. I drove home on weekends to fix things they could handle themselves. I answered late-night calls where my mother cried about her stress while ignoring my silence. Each time I went back, that house felt smaller than the last time, like the walls were leaning inward, remembering me in a way I did not want to be remembered. Visiting felt like stepping into a version of myself I no longer wanted to inhabit, the quiet girl who agreed with everything and tiptoed around tension. I left after an hour each visit, but it took days to shake the feeling off my skin. After graduating from my program, I moved into a small apartment near the hospital where I was hired as a full-time X-ray technician. It was the farthest I had ever lived from them both physically and emotionally. I decorated the apartment with secondhand furniture and cheap curtains. I bought a tiny plant for the windowsill. I stood in the doorway one night after unpacking the last box and let myself believe I had built something that belonged to me. But freedom is delicate and mine cracked easily. When things went wrong at their house, the calls came more often. Tyler was drinking more heavily by then. He failed out of 2 community college programs, totaled another car, and crashed on my mother's couch like a permanent storm cloud. Raymond blamed everyone but him. My mother blamed herself in a way that demanded I comfort her instead of addressing the chaos directly. I lost count of how many times I transferred money for Tyler's mistakes. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was helping because it was the right thing to do. But deep down, I felt the same old pressure tightening around my heart, the one that said if I did not carry the weight, the entire family would collapse. One night at 23, after a long shift at the hospital, my mother called sobbing. Tyler had punched a hole in the living room wall. Raymond was furious. She begged me to come home and talk to Tyler. She said he only listened to me. The truth was, he did not listen to anyone, but the guilt returned like muscle memory. I drove over at midnight and found Tyler slumped on the couch, reeking of beer, while Raymond watched television like nothing was wrong. My mother hugged me too tightly and whispered thank you for coming. I cleaned the mess. I calmed Tyler down. I patched the drywall while they all went to bed. When I drove home at 3 in the morning, I pulled into my apartment parking lot and sat in the car for 20 minutes, unable to move. The realization hit me like a weight. I had not escaped at all. I had only changed the walls around me. At 25, something shifted. I stopped answering every call. I stopped rushing home for every crisis. I stopped sending money unless it was necessary. My mother accused me of abandoning the family. Raymond accused me of being ungrateful. Tyler accused me of thinking I was better than them. Their words hurt, but not in the same way as before. There was a numbness growing in me, a quiet understanding that I would never be free if I kept letting them pull me back into their storm. Still, the rope tying me to them did not fully snap until that Thanksgiving years later when Raymond hurled a framed photo at my face and Tyler filmed me bleeding like it was entertainment. That moment did not come out of nowhere. It was the inevitable culmination of years of manipulation and emotional starvation. My early adulthood was not freedom. It was a pause between storms, a fragile illusion that let me pretend I had escaped while the shadows of my past waited patiently for the day they would crash back into my life. I should have known better than to go back. Even as my phone buzzed with my mother's message in early November, even as I stared at the notification glowing on my lock screen, a heavy tightness settled in my stomach like a warning I had learned to ignore too many times. Her text was simple. Please come home for Thanksgiving. Just one night. We miss you. I read it again and again, knowing the words did not match the truth. Still, something in me softened the way it always did when she reached out. Maybe it was hope foolish and fragile. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was the child in me who had spent too many years waiting for her to choose me. I sat on my couch with the message open and tried to convince myself things might be different this time. Tyler was older. Raymond was older. My mother had been sounding calmer lately. Maybe they had grown. Maybe I had. I wanted to believe that people changed. I wanted to believe that distance had softened the rough edges of our past. When I told my coworker Valerie that I was thinking about going home, she paused mid-sip of her coffee. "You sure about that?" she asked gently. "You do not owe them a holiday." I shrugged, trying to play it off. "It is probably fine. It is just dinner." She gave me a look that said she did not buy it, but she did not push. Maybe I wished she had. Instead, I packed a small overnight bag the night before Thanksgiving. I told myself not to expect anything. I told myself not to get hurt again. I told myself I was only going for a few hours. On the drive there, the trees lining the highway were bare, their branches skeletal in the gray afternoon light. The radio played soft holiday songs that made my chest ache with a kind of nostalgia I did not trust. By the time I turned onto the familiar street where I had grown up, the sky had darkened. Warm lights glowed from the windows of neighboring houses. Families were gathering. Laughter drifted through the cold November air. I parked in front of my mother's house and sat behind the wheel for a moment. The curtains were drawn, but I could see flickering lights inside. My reflection in the window looked tense, jaw tight, shoulders stiff. I forced a steady breath and stepped out of the car. The walkway crunching beneath my shoes felt too familiar. When I knocked, the door opened almost instantly. My mother stood there smiling that soft, practiced smile that always felt like a mask. "Emily," she said warmly, "I am so glad you came." She pulled me into a hug that lasted exactly 2 seconds before she let go and stepped back. I could smell the faint sweetness of her perfume mixed with wine. Her eyes flickered to my clothes as though assessing me the same way she used to when I was 17. "You look tired," she said. "Working too much, I bet." I forced a smile. "Just busy." Inside the house, the warmth hit me immediately, along with the smell of turkey rosemary and something slightly burnt. The living room furniture was the same, but the space felt smaller, as if the walls had crept inward over the years. Raymond sat in his usual recliner, a beer balanced on the armrest remote in hand. "Emily," he said with a curt nod. His tone carried no welcome. Tyler was sprawled on the couch legs, stretched out phone in hand. He did not look up. My mother motioned toward the dining table where the food was set out. The candles flickered gently. For a moment, the scene almost looked normal, but the tension lived under every surface like a thin layer of frost. As we sat down for dinner, the small comments began, the ones too subtle to call out, yet sharp enough to pierce. Raymond asked if I had finally been promoted yet in that little hospital job of mine. Tyler smirked when my mother asked if I was still single. My mother sighed every time I answered a question like my existence itself tired her. It was like stepping into an old script my body remembered too well. I tried to focus on my plate. I tried to keep my voice even, but every minute in that house reminded me of why I had left in the first place. Halfway through dinner, Raymond leaned back, cracked his knuckles, and said, "Tyler needs help getting back on his feet. He has had a rough year." My mother nodded sympathetically. "Your brother has been struggling. You know how hard life can be when people do not give you a chance." Tyler finally looked up, eyes half-lidded, an arrogant grin spreading across his face. "Yeah, Emily. Be a team player." I felt the familiar drain in my chest, the old squeeze of guilt and resentment wrapping around my ribs. I shook my head. "I cannot help him anymore. I have my own bills." Raymond's expression tightened with irritation. "Family helps family," he said. It was not a suggestion. It was a command. I felt my pulse rise, but I kept my tone steady. "I am not doing this tonight." My mother set her fork down with a soft clink that sounded like a warning. "Emily, do not start. Just listen. You owe us at least that much." And there it was. You owe us. Not gratitude, not love, debt, obligation, burden. The room felt smaller. The lights felt harsher. Tyler chuckled under his breath, clearly enjoying the tension. I pushed my chair back slowly. "I just need some air." My mother sighed dramatically. Always so emotional. I stood up, walked toward the kitchen, and gripped the counter to steady myself. The house was too warm, too loud, too familiar. I felt like I was 16 again, trying not to shake as someone blamed me for something I did not do. When I heard footsteps behind me, I knew it was Raymond. He spoke low voice, heavy with irritation. "Do not embarrass us tonight. Tyler needs help. You need to stop being difficult." I inhaled sharply and turned. I said no. He paused, eyes narrowing. My mother appeared in the doorway, holding her wine glass, watching with that same blank expression she had worn my entire childhood. "Emily," she said quietly, "stop provoking him." All I did was breathe. Before I could respond, Tyler wandered in, holding his phone, smirking like he was waiting for entertainment. "What's wrong, Emmy?" he said, too sensitive as always. And that was the moment I knew I should have listened to Valerie. I should never have come back. I was trying to step away from them, trying to pull myself together, when I heard Raymond mutter something under his breath as he reached for the framed photo on the credenza. The moment felt slow and fast all at once. His anger, the tightening in my stomach, the dread clawing up my throat. This was the moment everything would break. I did not know yet that the night would end with blood on the floor. I only knew that the house I had hoped might feel different was exactly the same. Every shadow exactly where I left it, every silence sharper than before. And in that silence, something inside me braced, waiting for the impact I had spent years trying to outrun. The moment the frame hit my face, everything fractured into sound and heat and disbelief. The world tilted. My vision burst with white, then red, then a dizzy blur as glass skittered across the floor. I felt the sting before I felt the pain, a sharp slice near my eye, followed by a warm stream slipping down my cheek. My hand flew to my face on instinct, fingertips pressing against torn skin. The metallic taste of fear filled my mouth before any words could form. I stumbled backward, hitting the counter behind me. My knees buckled, and I slid down until I was half sitting, half collapsing on the cold kitchen tiles. The room echoed with the clang of falling utensils and the low hum of the oven timer, but all of it sounded distant, like I was underwater. Raymond stepped forward, towering over me, his chest rising with heavy anger. His voice dropped into that dangerous tone he used when he wanted to remind everyone he held power. "Do not walk out on this family," he growled. The threat in his voice curled around me like smoke. I pressed my palm harder to the wound, but blood still seeped through my fingers warm and slick. In my daze, I saw movement to my right. Tyler's sneakers appeared first, then the rest of him as he crouched slightly phone raised, recording me like I was some spectacle at a carnival. "Say hi to the camera, Emmy," he said, voice coated in something crueler than laughter. His smirk twisted into something gleeful as he stepped closer. I tasted fear and humiliation together, bitter and suffocating. He angled the phone down at me, capturing everything. The blood, the shaking, the panic, the way I clutched the counter like it was the only solid thing left. Later, the police would recover that video from his phone when they seized it during an unrelated violent incident. Later, that video would become one of the strongest pieces of evidence against them. But in that moment, all I knew was that he was recording my pain as if it were entertainment. I forced myself to turn toward my mother, who stood in the doorway holding her wine glass frozen in place like a painting. Her face was blank, emotionless, as if she were watching a stranger bleed instead of her daughter. She had seen the impact. She had watched the frame hit me. She had heard the crack of glass, and still she said nothing. A cold wave rolled through me, sharper than the pain in my face. I pushed myself upward slowly, gripping the counter for balance. My vision wavered. The overhead light flickered. I blinked hard, trying to steady myself. Each breath felt ragged. Raymond took one more step toward me, chest puffed, jaw clenched, eyes raging. "You are not leaving," he snapped. His shadow stretched across the tiles toward me. I pulled my hand away from my face long enough to see blood smeared across my palm. The cut was deeper than I thought. Panic rose fast and hot. Tyler moved in closer still, recording. He leaned down slightly and zoomed in on the injury like he was filming a documentary rather than a moment of violence. "This is perfect," he muttered, like he had captured something valuable instead of something vile. I backed away from them, feeling along the counter for support. My legs trembled so hard I thought they would give out completely. Behind them, I saw the table still set for dinner, candles flickering, plates untouched, a picture of what the night was supposed to be. That life had never been mine. Without thinking, I shoved myself forward and darted around the island, nearly slipping in my own blood. Raymond barked something behind me. Tyler cursed when I slipped out of frame. My mother stayed silent, her wine glass still half full. I reached the hallway unsteady and disoriented. My hand left smears of red along the wall as I pushed myself toward the front door. Every footstep echoed louder than the last. I fumbled with the doorknob, my fingers slick and shaking. For a moment, I thought I would not be able to turn it. My pulse roared in my ears. The door finally gave way, and I stumbled outside into the cold night air. It hit me hard, a blast of November wind that sliced through the heat of panic. The porch lights cast a warm glow over the yard, but everything still felt dark. My lungs stuttered as I hurried to my car. I yanked the door open and collapsed into the driver's seat. Blood smeared onto the steering wheel as I gripped it tight. My breath came fast, shallow gasps. The pain in my face pulsed with every heartbeat. For a moment, I sat frozen, unable to even cry. Shock made everything feel distant, as if my body belonged to someone else. I forced myself to reach for my phone with trembling fingers. The first person my mind leapt to was Valerie. She had always asked the right questions, always listened when no one else did. When her voice answered, I could not speak at first. All that came out was a broken inhale. "Emily, where are you? Are you okay?" "Talk to me," she insisted. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. "He threw it at me," I whispered. "The frame. I am bleeding. I do not know what to do." "Stay where you are," she said immediately. "I am coming right now. Do not move. Do you hear me? Stay put." Her voice anchored me, pulling me out of the fog for just a moment. I pressed a napkin I found in the glove compartment against the wound, wincing at the sting. Tears welled in my eyes but refused to fall. I stared at the house glowing behind me. Inside its walls, my mother was probably still standing there, wine glass in hand, as if nothing had happened, as if I had not just bled in her kitchen, as if I were not her daughter. I leaned my head back against the seat and let out a shaky breath. The pain throbbed along my temple. My vision blurred again as the world dimmed to a soft haze of porch lights and shadows. In the cold stillness of my car, my body trembling, my wound, burning only one thought, repeated itself over and over like a whisper from some deeper part of me. It was not the pain that broke me. It was the silence that followed. Valerie arrived faster than I thought possible. One moment, I was sitting in my car staring at the front porch lights through a veil of dizziness, and the next, her headlights swept across the driveway like a wave of relief. She parked crookedly, barely turning off the engine before she rushed toward me. When she opened the car door, the cold air rushed in with her, followed by the soft gasp she could not hold back. "Emily!" "Oh my God," she whispered. "What happened to your face?" Her voice trembled, but her hands were steady as she reached out gently, lifting the napkin I pressed to my wound. The napkin peeled away with a tacky pull of dried blood and fresh sting. Valerie's eyes widened at the sight of the cut. "We need to get you to the ER now," she said. "Can you walk?" I nodded, though I was not certain I could. She helped me out of the car, one hand around my arm, the other hovering near my back in case I collapsed. I did not look toward the house. I did not want to know if anyone was watching. Valerie helped me into the passenger seat of her car and buckled the seatbelt for me. Her movements were quick but careful, like she was handling something fragile. As she drove, the streetlights streaked past the windows. I stared at them, watching the blur of gold and shadow, wishing I could sink into that nothingness. Valerie kept glancing at me, her jaw tight, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Emily," she said, finally, voice soft but firm. "Who did this?" I swallowed hard. The word was too heavy and too familiar. Raymond. And Tyler recorded it. Valerie sucked in a breath as though the air itself had turned to ice. "They what?" She shook her head slowly. Her voice thickened with fury. "I knew something was wrong. I told you not to go back." "I know," I whispered. My voice cracked on the second word. "I know." When we arrived at the ER, the bright lights inside made me blink hard. The world felt too sharp, too loud, too real. A nurse rushed over the moment she saw the blood on my face and ushered us into a triage room. Valerie refused to leave my side, even when the nurse tried to direct her elsewhere. She folded her arms and said, "I am staying." The nurse did not argue again. The triage nurse asked me what happened. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My throat tightened. My hands began trembling too fast to hide. Valerie stepped in gently. Her tone was calm, but laced with controlled anger. She was assaulted at her family's Thanksgiving dinner. Thrown object, impact to the face, possible concussion. The nurse's expression shifted to one of practiced clinical concern. She made notes quickly and helped me onto the examination table. The overhead lights were too bright. I closed my eyes as the nurse cleaned the blood and examined the wound. The antiseptic stung, but not as much as everything else inside me. "You are lucky," she said quietly. "Millimeter lower. And this could have damaged your eye. Lucky. The word felt strange, like it did not belong to me. When the nurse left the room, Valerie leaned against the wall and exhaled shakily. I cannot believe they did this to you. I looked down at my hands resting in my lap. They looked small, helpless. My voice came out barely above a whisper. He threw it like he wanted it to break. Valerie's eyes softened. And your mother. Her silence said everything. Valerie closed her eyes for a moment, jaw tightening. Emily, she said gently, this is not normal. This is not family. This is abuse. The word hovered between us. Heavy. True. I felt tears burn my eyes, but I blinked them back. I did not want to cry. I did not want to feel weak. The doctor came in next. He asked questions slowly, carefully. Did I lose consciousness? Did I feel nauseous? Did I remember the impact? I answered the best I could. He examined the cut and said it would need stitches. I nodded numbly. As he worked, I stared at the wall behind him, the sterile blue paint, the motivational poster about resilience. It all felt distant, like the world was happening several feet away from me. When he finished stitching the wound, he lowered his voice. Emily, he said, meeting my eyes. I have to ask. Do you feel safe going home? I did not even hesitate. No. He nodded as though he had expected the answer. Valerie stepped in. She can stay with me, as long as she needs. The doctor handed me aftercare instructions, then paused again. If you choose to file a report, there are advocates who can help. We take domestic violence very seriously. Domestic violence. I had always imagined bruises on arms, screaming matches smashed furniture. I never pictured my mother standing silently while her husband threw a framed photo at my face. But the truth was there, simple and undeniable. It had always been there. On the drive to Valerie's apartment, I sat quietly cradling the throbbing side of my face. The stitches pulled slightly with each movement, a physical reminder of what had happened. Valerie spoke softly. Emily, please listen to me. This cannot continue. They will do worse if you go back. You know that, right? I nodded. She hesitated. You need help. A lawyer. Someone who understands this. I did not argue. I did not deflect. Because deep inside, the truth finally settled cold and certain. I needed protection. I needed distance. I needed someone who would stand between me and the people who had hurt me my entire life. When we reached her apartment, she made tea, guided me to the couch, and sat beside me like she was guarding a wound she could not see. After a long silence, she said, There is someone I want you to talk to. His name is Charles Ridge. He is a domestic violence attorney. He helped my sister years ago. He is good. He is patient. He will believe you. Believe me. The words felt foreign, but they warmed something in me, something long buried. I looked at Valerie, her steady gaze, her quiet certainty. For the first time in a long time, I felt the faintest spark of safety. And that small spark was enough to help me exhale without shaking. The morning after the ER visit, I woke up on Valerie's couch with my face stiff from dried tears and the pull of fresh stitches. For a moment, I did not remember where I was. Then the ache near my eye returned like a sharp reminder, and everything came rushing back. The photo frame, the blood, Tyler's phone, my mother's silence. Valerie placed a blanket over me sometime in the night and left a glass of water on the coffee table. Her small apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that came from safety instead of fear. It felt strange. It felt unfamiliar. When Valerie stepped out of her bedroom, she moved gently as if afraid to startle me. Morning, she said softly. How are you feeling? I touched the bandage lightly. Sore, and tired, and embarrassed. Valerie shook her head immediately. Do not. None of this is your fault. After breakfast, she called Charles Ridge. I could hear her in the hallway speaking with a level of calm urgency I had only ever heard in nurses when they handled emergencies. By early afternoon, she had arranged a consultation. I almost backed out. My fingers trembled as I tied my shoes. My heart thudded unevenly. Taking Tyler's bullying had been one thing. Taking Raymond's control had been another. But speaking out loud about what happened felt like crossing a line I had been trained my entire life not to cross. Valerie noticed my hesitation. She touched my arm. "Emily, this is not about revenge. This is about protecting yourself. You deserve that." Her voice steadied me just enough to walk out the door. Charles's office was on the third floor of a brick building downtown. When we walked in, the receptionist gave Valerie a familiar nod. That alone told me she was right about his reputation. The waiting room had soft lighting and framed photographs of survivors whose stories were summarized in small captions beneath their smiles. I stared at them for what felt like too long. They all looked like people who had learned how to breathe again. I wondered if I ever would. When Charles called my name, I followed Valerie into his office. He was a tall man with warm eyes and sleeves rolled up to his elbows, giving him the appearance of someone always ready to work. He invited me to sit and offered water, then waited patiently until I looked up. "Tell me what happened," he said gently. "Start wherever you can." My throat tightened. My hands twisted in my lap. The words scraped their way out. "Thanksgiving." Raymond threw a framed photo at me. It hit me here. I gestured to my stitches. Tyler filmed it. My mother did nothing. Charles nodded slowly, but his eyes sharpened at the mention of recording. He did not interrupt. He took notes, but not the kind that made me feel examined. When I faltered, Valerie filled in the gaps. When I cried, Charles handed me tissues without commentary. When I apologized for crying, he stopped me gently. "You have nothing to apologize for." Once I finished, he leaned back in his chair, eyes thoughtful. "Emily, what you described is not an accident. It is repeated harm, and it is not new." I inhaled shakily. He continued. "Abuse is not always shouting or hitting. Sometimes it is silence. Sometimes it is control. Sometimes it is decades of being dismissed until you stop believing your own reality. You have endured all three." His words sank into me like stones. Heavy but grounding. Then he said something that sent a ripple through my chest. "And the video changes everything." Those words echoed through my mind. The video. He opened a folder and pulled out a printed list. "Here is what we need to build a strong case. Evidence, documentation, witnesses, medical records, police statements if you choose to make one. And most importantly, the video Tyler recorded." I swallowed hard. "But I do not have it." He motioned calmly. "You do not need it in your hands. If the police confiscate Tyler's phone during any other incident, or if we request a preservation order, we can obtain it legally. But first, we need to gather your part of the story." The next week became a quiet war. Not loud confrontations, not screaming matches, just steady methodical steps toward reclaiming something I never realized I had lost decades ago: my sense of truth. Charles guided me through each step like someone who had walked this path many times. First, we gathered medical evidence. Valerie drove me back to the ER to obtain copies of my treatment records, images of the wound before stitches, and the written notes the doctor made about the injury and the suspicion of domestic violence. I flinched reading the description of the wound. It seemed surreal seeing it typed in clinical language instead of feeling it burn on my skin. Next came the photographs. Valerie took them carefully in different lighting, documenting the bruising, swelling, and stitches. Each click of the camera felt like another piece of truth captured. Then came the emotional evidence, the phone calls, the voice messages, the text threads where my mother dismissed me, the ones where Raymond called me ungrateful, the ones where Tyler threatened me just enough to hide behind deniability. We printed everything. Then, Charles taught me something I had never been shown by my own family: how to document patterns. We created a timeline of events from my childhood to adulthood. Not dramatic moments only. The microaggressions, the manipulation, the financial pressure, the verbal intimidation, the silence. The silence mattered most. Valerie's voice shook when she realized how many years I had minimized. "Emily," she whispered, "this is not a bad family dynamic. This is systemic abuse." I stared at the timeline, feeling dizzy. Seeing it laid out in ink made the truth unavoidable. I had not imagined it. I had survived it. Midway through gathering everything, an unexpected breakthrough came. The police had seized Tyler's phone after a fight at a bar 2 nights after Thanksgiving. During processing, officers found the video of me bleeding in the kitchen. They flagged it as evidence of a separate crime and contacted Charles after seeing his preservation request. When Charles called to tell me, I felt a tremor go through my whole body. He said it gently but clearly. "Emily, we have the video." I sat down on the couch, gripping the phone. My heart raced. Something inside me cracked open. It was not fear. It was relief. Not because I wanted to ruin my family, but because for the first time in my life, the truth was no longer trapped in my memory alone. It existed outside me. It was undeniable. It was real. The footage captured everything. Raymond's rage, my mother's stillness, my bleeding, shaking body, Tyler's laughter, the cruelty in his voice as he zoomed in. "This is gold." Charles watched the entire thing. When he called afterward, his tone was steady but firmer than before. "Emily, this video will be central to your case. It shows not just the assault, but the family dynamic, the intimidation, the neglect." He paused. This video alone could win the case. He recorded his own crime. The gravity of those words left me speechless. The case was no longer "he said, she said." It was documented fact. Evidence spoke in ways I never could. The next step was emotional preparation. Charles warned me that confronting them would be painful, that abusers rarely react with accountability, that silence would break before the truth did. For the first time in my life, someone was explaining my family to me in a way that made sense, a way that made their behavior feel less like a reflection of my worth and more like a pattern of dysfunction that had nothing to do with me. On the night before the confrontation, I sat on Valerie's balcony wrapped in a blanket. The city hummed below us. The air was cold but clean. I pressed my fingertips to the line of stitches along my brow. The wound still hurt, but the ache felt different now. Not just physical, symbolic. A dividing line between the girl I had been and the woman I was becoming. Valerie stepped outside with 2 cups of tea and handed one to me. Nervous, she asked. Terrified, I admitted. She nodded. "That means you are doing something brave." I sipped the tea and let the warmth steady me. In the quiet, I realized something important. This war was not about them anymore. It was about me, my voice, my truth, my future. And for the first time, I felt something I had not felt since childhood. Resolve. The next morning, I walked into Charles's office knowing the quiet war was ending. The next battle would not be quiet at all. The day of the confrontation arrived colder than expected, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and made the air feel heavier. I woke before sunrise in Valerie's apartment and sat on the edge of the couch with my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles hurt. Today was the day everything would be put on the table. Today, the quiet war became loud. Today, I would face the 3 people who had shaped my life in ways I was only beginning to understand. Valerie drove me to Charles's office in silence, glancing over occasionally to check if I was still breathing. I was, but barely. When we pulled into the parking lot, my stomach twisted into knots. For a moment, I could not move. Valerie placed a steadying hand on mine. "You are not alone," she whispered. I nodded and followed her inside. Charles met us in the hallway outside his conference room. He looked calm in a way that made it easier to breathe. He handed me a glass of water and spoke in a tone that was both gentle and firm. "Emily, I need you to remember something. What happens today is not about getting them to understand your pain. It is about putting the truth in the open where it cannot be denied anymore." I exhaled slowly. "Are you sure I am ready?" He gave me a small, reassuring smile. "You are more ready than you think." We stepped into the conference room together. The lights were bright. There were files neatly organized on the table. A large monitor was set up on the far wall. I knew immediately what it was for. And then I heard the voices that still had the power to make me tense instinctively. They were arriving. Elaine entered first, wearing a navy coat and clutching her purse as if she were stepping into a social event rather than a legal confrontation. Her eyes flickered toward me, then away. Next came Raymond, his posture stiff expression carved from irritation and arrogance. He walked in like he owned the room. Tyler sauntered in, last hands in his pockets, his smirk already in place, as if he were approaching yet another chance to mock me. Seeing them together felt like being hit by a wave of memories I had spent years trying to drown. My heart thudded unevenly, but I stayed rooted in my chair. Charles greeted them professionally and invited them to sit across the table. For a moment, the room felt painfully still. Elaine broke the silence first. "I hope this is not going to take long," she said. "We all have things to do today." Charles did not react. Instead, he opened a folder and slid a printed document toward her. "Before we begin, I want to make something clear. We are here because Emily has suffered ongoing abuse, emotional, physical, psychological. This meeting is to present the evidence." Raymond scoffed loudly. "Evidence!" He repeated the word like it was a joke. "She is manipulating you people. She has always been dramatic." I clenched my jaw. Valerie placed a hand lightly on my back. Charles continued as if Raymond had said nothing at all. "Let us begin with the basics." He pulled out the ER records and placed them neatly on the table. Photographs followed next. Close-ups of my stitched wound, images of swelling, notes from the doctor who suspected domestic violence. I watched my mother scan the documents. Her face twitched just slightly, but she said nothing. Raymond leaned back with an unimpressed snort. She probably tripped. Charles did not even blink. "There is more, much more." He slid another set of documents forward, printed screenshots of text messages from Tyler, comments dripping with contempt, mockery, threats whispered through insinuation. Tyler rolled his eyes. "Jokes," he said. Those were jokes. No one at this table laughed. Charles replied quietly. Then came the audio files. Voicemails from Raymond calling me ungrateful, telling me I owed him for raising me, telling me I needed to learn respect. His voice filled the room like smoke, heavy, suffocating. Raymond's jaw twitched. He shifted in his seat, but still he said nothing of substance. Elaine stared at the table, not meeting anyone's eyes. Then Charles folded his hands together, signaling a shift in tone. "There is one final piece of evidence." The room stilled. He stood, picked up a remote, and turned on the large monitor mounted to the wall. The screen glowed blue. My heartbeat echoed inside my ears like a drum. And then I heard it. The first few seconds of the recording. Tyler's voice laughing. "Say hi to the camera, Emmy." My stomach dropped. The video began. There I was on the screen, bleeding, shaking, stumbling back onto the floor tiles as Raymond stepped toward me in anger. The sound of his voice filled the room as he commanded me not to walk out on this family. My mother appeared in the corner of the frame, standing still silent as a statue wineglass perfectly upright in her hand. And then, the worst part. The part Charles had warned me might be difficult to watch. Tyler zoomed in on my face. The cruelty in his laugh, the way he taunted me, the camera lingering on my fear like it was the best entertainment he had ever captured. When the video ended, the silence in the room was absolute. No one moved, no one spoke, no one breathed. I stared at the screen, unable to look away, even though every fiber of my body wanted to turn from it. Watching my own pain through someone else's lens made everything feel sharper, more real than it had in the moment it happened. Elaine was the first to break. She covered her mouth with her hand, eyes filling with tears. "Emily," she whispered, "I did not know it was that bad." Rage rose inside me so quickly it startled me. Not that bad. Her silence had been a wound all its own. Raymond finally leaned forward, his voice hard. "This is taken out of context. You provoked me. You have always provoked me." Charles's voice sharpened. "The video is context. It documents not only the assault but your response to it, your threats, your indifference, your wife's neglect, and your son's participation." Tyler sat stiffly now, his earlier arrogance flickering. He swallowed hard. His face paled. "I was just recording what was happening. I was not doing anything." "You were documenting a crime," Charles said. The room tightened with tension. Raymond stood abruptly, pushing his chair back so hard it screeched. "This is ridiculous," he barked. "You people think you can smear my name with this nonsense." I saw the shift before it happened. The quick rise of his chest, the clench of his fists, the way his eyes narrowed at me. He took a step in my direction, but he never reached me. 2 police officers stepped into the room at that exact second. Charles had instructed them to wait outside until the video was shown, knowing Raymond's temper would explode under pressure. The officers approached swiftly. Mr. Hargrove, one of them said, "We have questions regarding the assault depicted in this video." Raymond's face contorted with fury. "This is a setup! This is manipulation! This is not my fault!" His protests grew louder as the officers restrained him. Tyler stood up quickly as if preparing to intervene, but a second officer blocked him. "Tyler Hargrove, you are also being detained for further questioning regarding the digital evidence recovered from your device." Tyler's smirk dissolved completely. His mouth opened and shut like he could not form words. My mother sat frozen, trembling faintly. When Raymond was finally escorted from the room, the sudden quiet felt surreal. Tyler followed moments later, his expression blank with shock. And then it was just my mother sitting across from me, shoulders shaking, eyes swollen with tears. She looked at me as if seeing me for the first time in years. "Emily," she whispered, "I did not know what to do. I was scared of him." That was the excuse I had expected. That was the excuse she always used. And for the first time, I did not shrink when she said it. I let the truth rise in me steady and clear. "You were scared of him. I was scared of both of you. And you still did nothing." She covered her face with her hands, sobbing quietly. I did not feel satisfaction. I did not feel triumph. I felt something cleaner, something calmer, something like release. Charles placed a hand on the table near me. "You did well," he said softly. "Very well." I sat there breathing slowly, feeling the trembling in my chest ease for the first time in days. The truth was out. The lies were broken open. The video, the very thing Tyler had filmed to humiliate me, had become the centerpiece of justice. They had always controlled the story. Now the story belonged to me. The confrontation ended with paperwork signatures, next steps, legal protections being initiated. But emotionally, it ended the moment I stood up from that table, straightened my back, and walked out of the conference room knowing I had survived something enormous. Not just the attack. All of it. All the years of silence. All the years of being unseen. Outside the building, Valerie wrapped me in a hug. I sagged into her arms, exhausted but lighter. When I pulled back, she looked at me with a soft smile. "I told you," she said gently. "You are stronger than you think." I glanced up at the cold sky, and for the first time in my life, the air did not feel heavy. It felt like something new, something possible. The exposure day was over, but the aftermath was only beginning. The days after the confrontation unfolded like aftershocks from a long-buried earthquake, each moment bringing new revelations and a shifting of the ground beneath my feet as the legal system began its slow and deliberate process of peeling apart the layers of damage that had shaped my life. Valerie insisted I stay with her during the initial week, and I accepted because I did not yet trust the quietness of being alone, not after so many years of waiting for a door to slam or footsteps to thunder down a hallway. Charles called constantly with updates delivered in a tone both steady and cautiously optimistic. He explained that once Raymond and Tyler had been taken into custody, the police obtained warrants to search the Hargrove house. What they found surprised even him: unregistered weapons stored carelessly in the garage, stacks of liquor purchased through suspicious channels, and financial documents suggesting long-term tax evasion. All of it compounded the case against Raymond, who had strutted through life believing rules were for other people. Tyler's situation became even messier after detectives accessed his phone under the warrant. The video he had taken of me bleeding in the kitchen was only one piece. His device contained multiple recordings of him harassing other people, including an ex-girlfriend who had previously filed a restraining order. The prosecution felt confident he would not walk free anytime soon. Hearing that gave me a strange mixture of relief and sorrow, because no matter how cruel he had been, he was still a boy molded by the rot of the household we grew up in, though I no longer felt responsible for softening the consequences he had earned. Elaine, on the other hand, had not been arrested, but she quickly found herself under intense scrutiny. When the neighbors heard about the assault, they began sharing details with investigators. One neighbor admitted she had heard yelling for years, but thought it wasn't her place to interfere. Another revealed she once saw Raymond shove me in the driveway, but Elaine told her I had slipped. That comment sat with me for hours after Charles relayed it, because it made me understand how deeply my mother had participated in the construction of the facade that kept me invisible. Charles reassured me that her involvement, while not criminal in the same way, would still have legal consequences, particularly regarding any claim she might attempt to make on property or assets tied to my late father's estate. The house she lived in had always been partially mine, and now that truth was finally being treated as more than an afterthought. The first hearing for Raymond occurred only 3 days after the confrontation, and though Charles said I didn't need to attend, I sat in the back of the courtroom anyway, hidden by the rows of wooden benches. When Raymond was escorted in wearing the orange jumpsuit, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph, only the quiet understanding that justice was unfolding the way water finds its level. The judge denied him bail, citing his history of intimidation and the severity of the evidence, including the video and multiple witness statements. Tyler's hearing followed shortly. He looked far smaller than I had ever seen him, and when the judge read the charges, including assault, harassment, and violation of a prior order, he swallowed hard and stared at the floor. In that moment, I recognized the boy. He could have been in another life, but my sympathy did not excuse the harm he caused. Elaine sat 2 rows ahead of me, but never turned around even when the judge referenced her failure to intervene. After the hearings, the media picked up the story with local headlines describing a Thanksgiving assault captured on video, and the community reacted with shock. I received messages from old teachers, coworkers, and even distant relatives I barely remembered, each one expressing disbelief that I had been suffering behind the veneer of a respectable suburban family. Valerie filtered most of the messages so I wouldn't be overwhelmed, but she handed me one letter she thought I needed to see. It was from my father's sister, Aunt Miriam, who wrote that she wished she had known, that she wished she had stepped in years earlier, that she hoped I finally saw myself the way my father once did, bright, capable, worthy of every good thing. I cried, reading it not from pain, but from the release of a grief I didn't know I had been carrying. Meanwhile, Charles continued building the civil case. He walked me through each step with precision, describing how we would reclaim my father's property and sever any financial claim Elaine had over it. He explained that my documentation, the audio files, the photos, and most importantly, the video Tyler had filmed formed a wall of evidence that could not be disputed. Every time he said that word evidence, it felt like a rope loosening around my chest. The hardest part came when Elaine requested a meeting. Charles advised against it, but I agreed because there was a chapter I needed to close with my own hands. When Elaine arrived at Charles's office, she looked tired in a way that went beyond lack of sleep. Her voice trembled as she said she never meant for things to get so bad. She claimed she loved me but didn't know how to stand up to Raymond. For a long time, I said nothing. Silence had been my prison for so many years, but now it became my weapon. When I finally spoke, I told her the truth. She had refused to face that love without protection is not love, that a parent who does not defend their child is complicit, that I had spent years trying to make myself small, so she wouldn't have to choose between me and the man she married. She cried quietly, but the tears didn't fix anything, nor were they meant to. They were simply the final thread snapping between us. After she left, Charles turned to me and said, "You did exactly what you needed to do." Raymond eventually accepted a plea deal that would send him to prison for several years, with additional charges related to the weapons and financial crimes still pending. Tyler was sentenced to both jail time and mandatory rehabilitation. Elaine quietly moved out of the house, which by then was already under legal review for foreclosure due to unpaid taxes uncovered during the investigation. I was granted full ownership of my father's portion of the estate, and though Charles said I could renovate and reclaim the home if I wanted, I realized I didn't need to. The house was a graveyard of old wounds, and I had no desire to rebuild anything inside its walls. Instead, I began volunteering at Safe Women Tennessee, the organization Valerie had introduced me to. I sat in small rooms with women who whispered stories that echoed pieces of my own, and I helped them document their experiences with the same quiet determination Charles had taught me. I was not their savior, but their witness, and sometimes that was enough to spark a change. The fallout from everything did not feel like destruction. It felt like clearing a field long overgrown with weeds, finally making space for something new to grow. Freedom did not announce itself loudly. It came softly in moments like waking without anxiety, like knowing no one would storm into my space uninvited, like feeling the air settle peacefully around me. For the first time in my life, I was not waiting for the next blow. I was not waiting to be hurt. I was not waiting to be ignored. I was simply living, and the quiet of it felt like a kind of rebirth. The first thing I noticed in the months after the sentencing was the quiet, a kind of quiet I had never experienced before, not the suffocating hush of a house where everyone was waiting for someone to explode, but a gentle stillness that wrapped itself around my mornings and allowed me to breathe without flinching. I woke up one day and realized the world no longer felt like a battlefield I had to navigate with my shoulders tense and my voice small. Instead, it felt open wide, almost tender, in the way sunlight spilled through my apartment blinds and warmed the floor. I began to understand that healing does not arrive with dramatic fireworks or triumphant music. It arrives slowly like dawn, inching across the sky bit by bit, until suddenly you realize night has passed. I returned fully to my work at the hospital, moving through the radiology halls with a sense of purpose that felt freshly sharpened. Patients who had once seemed like faceless tasks now became people whose pain I recognized in a way I never had before. Trauma teaches you to notice everything, not just danger, but quiet resilience, the small ways people hold themselves when they are trying not to fall apart. I saw it everywhere now, and maybe because of that, a shift happened at work. Nurses began approaching me more often. Younger techs lingered after shifts asking how I managed to stay calm when cases got heavy. One afternoon, the department head pulled me aside and said there had been a noticeable difference in the way I carried myself. Not lighter exactly, but steadier, more grounded. I smiled because that was the closest thing to a compliment I could have hoped for. Outside the hospital, my life expanded in ways I did not expect. I began volunteering more seriously with Safe Women Tennessee, attending weekend workshops, trainings, and late evening support circles where survivors gathered in folding chairs around lukewarm coffee and finally spoke truths they had buried for years. I listened, I nodded. Sometimes I shared pieces of my own story, not the whole thing because that belonged to me, but enough to let someone else know they were not alone. One night, a woman with trembling hands said quietly, "I thought I was crazy for staying so long." I met her eyes and felt something inside me settle into place. "You were surviving," I said. "There is a difference." Slowly, I began speaking in small settings whenever the organization asked. The first time was terrifying, even though the audience was only 15 people, but they sat so still and listened so intently that by the time I finished, my voice no longer shook. Charles came to one of those meetings, once sitting in the back with a soft smile. Afterward, he told me, "You have a way of making people feel seen." I did not know how to answer that because I had spent most of my life feeling unseen by the people who were supposed to look at me first. But perhaps survival had taught me a language they could not. Winter returned again, soft and pale, marking 1 year since the night everything changed. Valerie helped me light a candle on my tiny kitchen counter, not to commemorate the pain, but to honor the version of myself who survived long enough to escape it. She raised her mug of tea and said, "To the woman you became." I raised mine too, my chest warm with gratitude. To the woman I never thought I would get to be. A week after the anniversary, Safe Women Tennessee hosted a community conference at the hospital auditorium, and they asked me to give the closing message. I hesitated at first because speaking to a room of strangers felt much larger than the quiet circles I had grown used to, but Valerie looked me squarely in the eye and said, "Emily, someone needs your voice today." So, I agreed. The auditorium filled slowly the night of the event. Nurses in scrubs, mothers clutching tote bags, older women with folded programs. A few men sitting stiffly with eyes that flickered with shame or determination. The air felt heavy but expectant. When they called my name, I walked up to the podium without rushing. I felt the weight of the moment, but not the fear. The lights above were warm and the microphone smelled like metal and dust. I rested my hands on the lectern and took one breath, then another. I began with the truth. Last Thanksgiving, I bled on the floor while my mother watched. The room went completely still. I let the silence stretch just long enough for them to feel its shape. I continued, my voice steady, not theatrical, but sincere. I told them how silence can feel like love when you are raised to believe enduring pain is the price of peace. I told them how people like Raymond and Tyler thrive in that silence, how it becomes their camouflage and their shield. I told them how my mother's quiet hurt more than any blow. I spoke about the legal process, the evidence gathering, the hours of documentation that saved my life. I spoke about the night I watched my own suffering on a screen in a conference room and realized for the first time that the truth was undeniable even to those who had tried so hard to bury it. I told them healing does not mean forgetting. It means reclaiming the voice someone else taught you to mute. At one point, I saw a woman in the third row wipe her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater. A young man in the back lowered his head into his hands. An older woman pressed a hand to her chest as if steadying her heartbeat. And in that moment, I understood that this was not about me. It was about them. It was about everyone who had ever sat at a dinner table afraid to speak. Everyone who had ever been told they were too sensitive. Everyone who had ever been made to believe pain was their fault. I ended with the message I had once whispered to my own reflection on a night when I thought no one would ever hear me. If you are in a house where silence feels safer than truth, I see you. If you are holding your breath just to keep the peace, I see you. If you think no one will believe you, I believe you. If you think you cannot leave, you can. And if you think your story ends in darkness, it does not. It ends the moment you decide to speak. And it can end with the words I finally said for myself. It ends now. When I stepped back from the podium, the applause was not loud but deep, like the sound of a room full of people exhaling after holding something heavy inside themselves for too long. Several attendees lined up to speak to me afterward. A woman with silver hair squeezed my hands and said, "You gave me back something I thought I lost." A man in his 50s whispered, "My daughter needed to hear this." A young nurse hugged me tightly, whispering, "I want to be as strong as you someday." I told her, "Strength is not something you become. It is something you remember you already are." That night when I returned home, the air felt crisp and the sky wide. I stood on my balcony and let the cold settle across my cheeks. For the first time in my memory, the world felt not like a place I was trying to escape, but a place I was finally stepping into. Healing was not a destination. It was a way of walking, a way of breathing, a way of living without fear. As I stood there watching the lights of the city flicker like distant constellations, I whispered the message I hoped would reach someone out there, someone still trapped in the kind of silence that nearly swallowed me whole. I see you. You deserve safety. You deserve peace. And you are stronger than you think. It ends now. Sometimes healing does not arrive with fireworks or triumph, but in the quiet moments after the storm, when you finally realize the world is no longer collapsing beneath your feet. If you are still here listening to my voice, then maybe something in my story echoed inside you, a memory you tried to bury, or a wound you learned to hide because no one ever gave you permission to speak it out loud. Maybe you know what it feels like to sit at a dinner table where everyone smiles while your heart trembles beneath the surface. Maybe you have endured the weight of silence from the very people who should have protected you. Or maybe you are still living in a house where your voice has been folded so small you barely recognize its sound anymore. If that is you, I want you to hear me clearly because this is the part of the story that belongs to you. Pain does not make you weak. Fear does not make you broken. And surviving does not make you responsible for the cruelty of others. For years, I believed that silence kept the peace, but silence was the door that locked me inside a life that was slowly erasing me. I thought I could endure my way into being loved. I thought if I stayed quiet enough, small enough, accommodating enough, someone would finally see me. But the truth is this: you cannot earn the kindness that someone refuses to give. You cannot fix a person who depends on your suffering to feel powerful. You cannot heal in the same place where you were hurt. So if you are watching this tonight from a couch where you are hiding bruises beneath sleeves, or from a bedroom where you listen for footsteps you hope will not stop at your door, I want you to know that your story does not have to end in that house. There are people who will believe you the first time you speak. There are laws designed to protect you even if no one told you about them. There are strangers who will hold your truth more carefully than your own family ever did. And there is a version of you waiting on the other side of fear, a version who sleeps peacefully, who breathes freely, who walks through the world without apologizing for existing. Maybe you are not ready yet. Maybe the thought of leaving terrifies you more than staying. That is okay. Survival comes in steps, not leaps. But one day, when the weight becomes too heavy, you will reach for the doorknob and you will walk toward a life that feels like yours again. And when you do, I want you to remember this moment, this voice, this story. I want you to remember that someone out here sees you, believes you, and knows exactly how hard it is to take that first step. If you feel alone tonight, you are not. If you feel invisible tonight, you are not. If you feel unworthy of love or safety, you are wrong. You deserve a life without fear. You deserve a home where your laughter is welcome and your silence is not punishment. And if no one has ever told you that before, let me be the first. You deserve better than their silence. So tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Tell me your story if you feel ready. Tell me what part of this spoke to you. And if you cannot tell me yet, just type "I am here." I will know what it means. You are not alone. You are not invisible. And your story does not end in the dark. It ends the moment you whisper what I once whispered to myself. It ends now.